Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football Dill. Another Tuesday night, another set of college football playoff rankings. Until we're going to get into some of our disagreements with these rankings, but I have a feeling we're going to have some disagreements of our own in terms of how we evaluate some of these resumes as well. That to me is kind of the beauty of it. Like, you look at the message boards, you look at Twitter, every Tuesday night, we'd normally be in our beds watching a movie, watching some TV. No, the people are going to war in the comment section, on Twitter, on the message boards. Wouldn't want to have it any other way. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, let it fly in the comment section, whether you agree with the boys, disagree with the boys, mixing it up with an opposing fan base. That's what it's about. Appreciate you guys. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Dill, let's get into this one. Let's start, as usual, with the team that we think – I'm going to say you think, so I think I know what team you're going to say, and I'm probably going to disagree. A team that you think is ranked too high in these college football playoff rankings. Who you got?
So I'm going to disagree at 9, 10, 11. Frankly, I think Miami should be below both Alabama and Ole Miss. And I get Alabama, Ole Miss don't have bulletproof resumes. They've both taken some ugly losses. Kentucky, Vandy, those aren't good losses. There are other losses you can kind of deal with. A tight one to LSU for Ole Miss, a tight one to Tennessee at Tennessee for Alabama. Like those are okay losses. You can kind of live with it. My issue with Miami is with the down ACC, I don't love that. Like their best win is Florida, and I will say that's not a bad win.
Their best win's on the road against a top 20 Louisville team. Dill, what I'll say about Miami, I'm going to look, do I recognize that there are massive flaws within this Miami Hurricanes team? We just did an episode earlier today talking about this defense and talking about a disaster it's been the last couple of weeks.
My fundamental issue is, like, again, resume to resume, maybe you can argue Miami. But when I'm looking at those two teams, and especially the way they're starting to play now, where I feel like you're seeing Alabama and Ole Miss correct maybe some mistakes, and you're seeing the same ones kind of persist with Miami, especially on the defense side of the ball, I kind of like my eyeballs are telling me those two teams are better. And frankly, the one issue is if Miami then wins out and loses that ACC title game, are you going to knock Miami below Ole Miss and Alabama, who aren't going to play conference championship weekends? It doesn't look like at this point. Because that to me is like, that'll be a tough conversation.
I think you are right in terms of Miami needs to be perfect the rest of the way. And I think they kind of put it on themselves with kind of getting in these barn burners. And how we talked about it early in the season was, hey, Miami's getting through these games. It's hard to win every single Saturday. You're hoping they address some of the mistakes that you see them make. They haven't addressed anything. I mean, it continues to be a defense that really is struggling. Now, the reason I'll defend Miami is they have the thing I trust the most out of any of these three teams, and that is an offense that can put points up on the board like the best offense in the country. I think Cam Ward's playing like the best quarterback in the country. So they do have some things that you really like about them, but they are not a bulletproof team right now. The frustrating thing is, and I've personally had this take pretty much consistently in 2024, is it's going to get better on defense. Like, I just look at that front seven, say Ruben Bain, Akeem Mesidor, Simeon Barrow, Tyler Baird. It's too good of a front seven to not figure it out at some point. Now we're sitting here. What do we got? November 12th on a Tuesday night, and saying the same problems with this Miami Hurricanes team. And I'd argue it's even gotten worse because that front seven is struggling to stop the run to go along with the secondary that's really, really struggling defending the pass.
And that's fundamentally my issue. Frankly, I think Miami should be put in a spot just like SMU is, where they kind of need to win this ACC conference. I'm not sure I love the idea of two ACC teams getting in. If Miami went undefeated until the ACC title game, very different story. But with that one loss and really not a great opportunity to prove that you're a real hammer, like Ole Miss, Alabama have had their chances to beat teams like Georgia or like those type of teams that you need to beat. I just don't think Miami is going to have
the one defense, and we can get into that ACC conversation in just a second. My one defense for Miami's resume is they did go on the road and beat a Florida team very, very badly week one. And we've seen that same Florida team play teams like Tennessee very closely. We've seen Florida, even with the third string quarterback, play Georgia relatively close for 3 quarters. So we've seen that Florida team give some teams in the SEC some problems. We saw Miami shellac them in the swamp. So that certainly helps their resume when you're trying to, trying to cross-examine the ACC versus the SEC. Now, getting to that ACC conversation, I do think it's starting to look like there's only one team getting into the ACC, and that's the ACC champion, because you start stacking up the ACC and what they've done out of conference. You look at Clemson and say they go and get smoked by Georgia week 1. And so that's kind of like your evaluation for the ACC crossing over to the SEC. You look at Florida State, they've been an absolute disaster. The strength of the ACC is significantly weaker than what we thought it would be coming into 2024. And for that reason, and then you look at the Big Ten and the SEC and what they've done out of conference and say, it's hard to see more than one team right now in the ACC getting into the 12-team college football playoff.
And that's kind of why my fundamental issue with Miami being ranked above those two teams, because I think it opens up that pathway to kind of let that happen, which I do not think at this point can happen. I'll give you another, and I know that you're going to have this issue. I'm going to defend Texas being at 3. I know we talked about this earlier. Texas at 3, I'm very okay with. And again, I get the people, like, you're a resume guy. I can just tell by the way you talk to me about this stuff. I think you got to combine.
That's what it's about, brother.
No. You have to combine resume and the eyeball test.
Fair.
Texas, yes, the resume is not incredibly great. Again, Texas A&M is going to be very, very revealing game, in my opinion. They need to win that. If they don't win it, I don't think they have a really good chance at all of making this thing. But you look at that team, I think they can be more explosive than a lot of the, like, if you're going to argue Penn State, they're a much more explosive offense than Penn State. And that defense, I think, is pretty legit.
Yeah, 100%.
Again, I probably want to see it against a really good offense, but I look at the team speed, I look at the physicality. That looks to me like a really good defense. So I'm pretty comfortable having Texas 3, as much as I know the Georgia game got out of hand a little bit.
Yeah, and that did to me just look like a game that got off the rails, and sometimes that's going to happen. You're right. The Texas resume is not great so far. Like, what are you kind of hitching your wagon to a 3-point win against Vanderbilt, or going on the road and beating a Michigan team that just can't score a point on offense? Like, that win we thought was really impressive week 2. It doesn't look all that impressive. Fast forward to today. But I do my one question with Texas is the reason I was so high on Texas heading into the year and kind of building up to that Georgia game was, hey, that offensive line, that might be the best offensive line in the country. And then you saw Georgia like tear them apart along the lines of scrimmage. I didn't think it looked all that good against Vanderbilt. Now it shaped up against Florida. If you can get that version of the offensive line the rest of the way, and again, that Texas A&M game will tell us a lot about where Texas is.
It was also very good against Michigan. As much as Michigan stinks for the most part,
agreed.
Michigan proved against Indiana that they can still tear you up a little bit up front. So again, I look like you're going to make the argument. Are you going to say BYU, Indiana, or Penn State are like you're comfortable putting them above Texas? I'm not sure you can do that, because you look at Penn State, they don't really have a great win at this point. I mean, they played Ohio State, really couldn't move the ball. And then Indiana also doesn't really have any sort of real win. And they look terrible against Michigan, to be very frank, versus Texas, who look really good. So I think you got to leave Texas where they are.
Yeah, okay, Dale. We're both Michigan fans, despite me wearing a Wake Forest t-shirt. Did you really think Michigan had a shot in that football game?
Oh, yeah. They got my hopes up. They
yeah, you're right.
I thought
yeah, maybe from a fan perspective, are we going to penalize that? That's the first ugly game we've seen from
it's the only chance they had to play a real bona fide team with NFL talent.
Yeah, and I'm kind of with you, because we thought we'd get that against Nebraska, and we just Nebraska has not looked good since that loss to Indiana. With Indiana, this is what I'll say, and we can move on from Indiana. I do think it is very dependent on how they look against Ohio State. We said this a couple of days ago. I'll say it again. If Indiana keeps it close and shows they belong on the same football field with Ohio State, you cannot leave a one-loss Indiana team out. I don't care if they win or lose that. I mean, if they beat Ohio State, we're talking about Indiana maybe being the best team in the country. If they lose that game, but they keep it close, they show they belong with some of those college football playoff teams, you can't leave them out, because they have just dominated every other team that we've seen.
My final question for this little part: who do you have above Texas at this point.
Yeah, so that's where it gets tricky. Is like I don't know if there's a team I'm like if I was going to be a resume nerd, I'd maybe say like an undefeated Indiana or an undefeated BYU. But I'm the thing with
Well,
that
I'll
is
give you
Texas.
teams, frankly, if
I'll
you don't want to
no
do the
no hold
team.
on hold on. I'll say this. I think I'm getting a little confused sometimes because I think Oregon and Ohio State have kind of separated themselves as the top two teams in the country. And then like there's a gap. And then I guess like there's not really a team that I'm going to bang the table for that should be over Texas. Maybe it would be Tennessee because I do think they have some more impressive wins than
That's why.
Texas does. And Tennessee from the eyeball test, man, I do think if we have some question marks about it, if Nico's going to play this Saturday, but I'll say this, that Tennessee team has a lot of aspects of that football team that I really do like a lot.
And Nico's turning up when he's on the field now. He's starting to play some really good football. That was kind of one missing piece, it felt like, for this Tennessee team. But dominant defense, dominant run game. If they start getting Nico playing some high level quarterback, I'd probably have them at 3.
Yeah, that again, that's the funny part is you can say that for so many different teams. Like I look at Tennessee, I look at Alabama, I look at Ole Miss, and say I look at Georgia and say we've seen versions of those teams that look like they might be the best team in the country. Now the problem is we haven't seen those versions consistently from a lot of those teams. I think it kind of depends on what team starts looking the part consistently down the back half of November. Look, Ole Miss sitting at 11. We said this before the Georgia game last week, Dale. Ole Miss playing their best football can be one of the most dangerous teams in the country. We saw them do that against Georgia. I get their resume probably won't allow them to be any higher than 11 right now because you got an ugly loss against Kentucky. You didn't put away LSU on the road. Man, that Ole Miss team, though.
That's why you have to combine resume with eyeball tests because you're right. Alabama and Ole Miss, and frankly, even Georgia, have played like, ooh, those could be top 3 football teams, but their resume doesn't say it. I think you look at a team like Tennessee, again, not a great loss against Arkansas for sure, but they have really good wins. They obviously beat Alabama. Well, that's probably the only really good win. They'll have their shot, obviously, against Georgia.
Yeah.
But that Alabama game, I think you're very impressed with. They beat an Alabama team that I don't think was playing terrible that day, frankly. So I look at it, I think Tennessee, they're probably the one team that you probably really argue is underrated in the top 7, I would say.
Yeah, I could maybe get with that. Taking a look at teams outside of the top 12 that you think you're keeping your eyeballs on. And I'll start with like the Big 12 teams. I'll say this again. Colorado sitting at 17. Look, Colorado fans don't give a damn what their rank is because they got everything in front of them. Like if they go and win a Big 12 championship, which they're in the driver's seat to get there right now, they're getting in. That is a team that is playing some dang good football down the stretch, especially in the landscape of the Big 12.
Now, if that happens, you get a real interesting conversation. Does BYU belong in? Because frankly, with the way the playoff committees ranked them, they're kind of saying they do belong in. Because like obviously, you're gonna have a bunch of teams that won't be able to prove anything on conference title weekend. If BYU loses, and we've seen the nut on this team, like what did TCU lose the conference title and not get it, or you have obviously
still got in.
Like USC sitting behind them, who obviously kind of got punished for losing in a conference title weekend. They have shown a history to not punish teams for it, but frankly, I don't think there's any argument for 2 Big 12 teams getting in this year because it's not a good enough conference top to bottom.
Yeah, I do agree. I think if you want to get into the college football playoffs in the Big 12, you're going to have to win the Big 12 championship because when you've seen Big 12 teams play cross conference, it has not shaped out well for the Big 12 teams.
Well, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I probably think BYU's frankly a little bit overrated. They should be in a position where they need to win that conference, I think. Too many close wins against not good teams, like similar to Miami.
You got
to be
do have that win on the road to SMU early, and I know it wasn't with Kevin Jennings. I know you can put an asterisk there, but it's still a win. And look, at the end of the day, we see a lot of teams struggle to win football games every single Saturday. BYU is doing it. I'll give you one that just keep your eyeballs on, and this is a dark horse, but I'm gonna ride a dark horse right now. South Carolina sitting at 21. Not only are they starting to play really damn good football, but they're also going to have an opportunity to really climb in the ranks, because you look at Missouri sitting there at 23, although I completely disagree with ranking Missouri in the top 25. No, they're a top 25 team, and Missouri and South Carolina square off this weekend. South Carolina takes care of business. They'll probably jump around top 18 team in the country. Then they're going to have Clemson at the end of the year. That is two top 25 matchups that South Carolina has on their schedule, with an opportunity to really climb the rankings. And Dylan, what if Texas A&M goes and beats Texas? I mean, South Carolina has the head-to-head to them. And we've seen the committee kind of value what have you done for us lately. They might overlook some of the weaker games that they saw from South Carolina in September. This team is scorching hot right now with an opportunity to get into that conversation. Now, even if they do win out, I think there will be some chips would need to fall the right way for South Carolina to get in. But all you can ask for is a chance in the middle of November. And I think Shane Beamer, the South Carolina Gamecocks, they got a chance.
And honestly, probably aside from any team or any team ranked below Texas A&M, frankly, unless they win their conference, I don't think they really have a path. South Carolina is probably the one team because they'll have enough chances to have really good wins. Now, they'll have some ugly losses, obviously, but they'll have a chance to make themselves some really good wins. And even their losses, like the only really bad one I think you'd say is Ole Miss.
You look at the two.
And Lenore Sellers was playing bad football. Like he's really progressing in a way I think you wanted to see. But it's not like Ole Miss moved the ball a whole lot on them. They were just turning it over.
The South Carolina deal, like nobody, maybe some people are talking about it now. That defense is so legit. It is so good at all three levels. NFL dudes. Dylan Stewart is about as impressive a true freshman as I've seen rushing the passer in a very long time. The South Carolina team's dangerous. Outside of that, again, that's probably all the takes that I have right now. We're probably going to take some deeper dives into some of these teams and talk about pathways to the college football playoffs. We'll sign out now. Appreciate you guys rocking with it. Again, let it fly in the comment section. I know there's some controversial takes that the boys put out there. That's the beauty of it. But feed us it in the comment section. Appreciate you guys, and we'll talk to y'all later. Peace.